and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. Whether public service broadcasting, it's a perennial question in the local broadcasting landscape, one rendered more acute when Stratos TV, which had been compared to Australia's SBS, closed down at Christmas. And the channel you're watching, TVNZ7, is still due to go dark at the end of June. Its fate sealed last April when the government declined to renew its funding. We'll discuss the issues, but first, Sam Mulgrew in The Source finds out who's watching this stuff.
Box viewing that simulates the grey matter is a rare thing these days, and on Christmas Eve, when Freeview Channel 21 Stratos died of a lack of support at all levels, the options tightened still. As well as airing the big gigs, Stratos produced first-run local public telly.
Why John Key had to kill Winston Peters,
Costing them a thrifty $1,800 per hour to make. With that bottom line, why is the public service dying? The funding gaps are big, but it can be relatively cheap to produce. And lots of taxpayers enjoy it. TVNZ7's monthly cumulative audience grew by more than 25% last year to 1.4 million people, all without visible schedule listings and with a third of the Māori television service budget. New Zealand public service broadcasting gets one of the lowest levels of government support in the developed world. A meagre $32 per citizen per year. And if you thought it's all irrelevant because the web is destroying TV, wrong. Kiwis spend more and more time watching, steadily rising 34 minutes daily in a decade to 3 hours and 22 minutes every day. And nearly 3/4 of us watch digital. Will it really be fat people and public flagellation that keeps us there?
She's tampering in dark-sided stuff!
Sam Mulgrew there, but those aren't the numbers you may have seen quoted elsewhere in the media. Two New Zealand Herald editorials, one last April, one last month, quoted the figure of 207,000 viewers weekly for TVNZ7 and arguing for the channel's demise. The figure came from former Broadcasting Minister Jonathan Coleman, but we were mystified as to where he got it. TVNZ7 doesn't report weekly audiences. Nielsen has never recorded such a measure and described the number to us as rubbish. Well, we think we've worked it out. The Minister's office started with the so-called CUM, that's cumulative audience, for 4 weeks beginning on the 23rd of January 2011, the channel's quietest month of the year. In those 4 weeks, Nielsen said 827,800 different people watched TVNZ7. And if you divide that number by 4, you get more or less 207,000. Except that's not how it works. You don't get a weekly CUM by dividing a monthly CUM by 4. Allow me to welcome someone who might shed light on it all, the co-founder of the Throng TV website and former lecturer in statistics at Auckland University, Rachel Cunliffe. President of the New Zealand Screen Directors Guild, Peter Bell, and long-time Marketing Director for the New Zealand Film Commission, Lindsay Shelton. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
So, Rachel, for the benefit of all the school children watching, why don't you get a weekly CUM by dividing a monthly CUM by 4?
It sounds like a simple thing. Take the monthly figure, divide by 4 and get a weekly figure. Let's take a simple example though. If I told you 4 people in my house watched TV in the last month, would you then say 1 person a week is watching TV in my house each week? No. It could be the case, but you can't definitely conclude that. It could be that all 4 people are watching weekly as well as monthly. So it could be that that 800,000 that they took is actually also the weekly cumulative figure, not just the monthly cumulative figure.
So, and we don't know that, but in
No,
theory, the weekly cumulative audience could be anything from 200,000 to 800,000. But it is more likely to be towards the high end of that scale, closer to 800,000 than the 200,000 that we've seen quoted everywhere.
Yeah, because TV is largely a weekly habit, and so, you'd imagine that numbers from week to week would be, there'll be a lot of overlap between people watching from week to week.
So it's quite likely that the figure that we've seen everywhere in the media for TVNZ7's weekly audience is understated by 2/3.
Yeah, it's a major factor, a big difference between those figures.
So it's kind of shocking, isn't it? Would you agree with the rubbish
Yeah, especially since they picked the lowest month of the year rather than taking a whole year period when you're going to get a better idea of trends. You know, the more sunlight, the less people watch TV in New Zealand.
The Herald not only quoted that figure via the Minister, but also ran the Minister's comparison of that invalid figure with One News's nightly audience of 600,000. Was that a valid comparison to make? Did it make any sense?
Not at all. You're comparing apples with oranges. And secondly, why fixate on one really big number? Let's look at, even if it was 200,000 a week, the smallest number it could possibly be in the lowest month. That's roughly 1 in 20 Kiwis who are involved with that channel on a weekly basis. That's a huge crowd when you consider the big crowds on TV for events. You know, people would be excited to see 200,000 people turn up each week.
And given that, from the look of what Nielsen is telling us, it's likely to be 3 times that.
Yeah. And in that case, you know, how big is big enough before people are saying this is, you know, this is acceptable? 1 in 20, you know, there'll be many arts programs in New Zealand that would be ecstatic to get those kind of turnout.
Peter, did you take that 207,000 weekly figure as being accurate? Because I know a lot of people did.
Well, I guess I did. I took him at his word. On the other hand, I would argue that public broadcasting isn't necessarily to be fixated on figures, and in some ways I think that was probably just an excuse to help remove funding more than anything else.
Well, I gather that in the government's original agreement with TVNZ about TVNZ7, audience numbers weren't actually a figure. It wasn't a deliverable.
No, and you're talking about a channel that has had no public profile in terms of advertising, and it also has no listings that I can find anywhere on the in the newspapers. So
I can tell you, well, it's in the Fairfax papers now. It's not in the APN papers or the Listener,
okay.
Because APN and TVNZ could not come to an agreement. APN wanted a discount in order to carry the listings. TVNZ wanted to be paid the same, and that's where it stuck for 5 years.
Right.
It's unfortunate, isn't it? What would you say then, if we're not talking about numbers, where is the value in public service broadcasting? Because these are straitened times.
Sure they are, and if you look at the way broadcasting has gone, I mean, there's a plethora of channels out there, and we're fulfilled with all sorts of sporting regalia and all sorts of different niche channels. I would argue that even though we have all these pipelines, if you like, and the internet would be one of them, that doesn't necessarily mean that citizens are getting the information that they necessarily would need to function in a democracy or to get clear information. It seems to be that with a commercial model, the loudest voices, or the people with the most money and control, can have more control over the message that comes out. And really, with all those messages, perhaps public service is more needed than ever.
You had conversations with the former minister about this, didn't you? How did that go?
Well, he listened to us, and then it was sort of, this is what we're doing, which is, you know, you have probably read his statement in Parliament. He got up and said, we support public broadcasting, and then removed the charter. They had Channel 6 and 7 running then, but of course they've made no provision for them since then. I've heard arguments that Māori Television is a public broadcasting channel, that like you said before, not enough people watching. But to me, I don't think you can say Māori Television is necessarily the default public broadcaster. It has a totally different mandate.
I think it's doing a fine job.
It is, but its mandate is te reo, and to support te reo. I know it's probably stretched the boundary somewhat because things were missing, and it has filled that in. But no, it's not the public broadcaster of New Zealand.
Lindsay Shelton, did you correspond with the Minister too?
He made a speech, Jonathan Coleman made a speech when he was Minister of Broadcasting saying there should be diversity in television in New Zealand. Good speech. And a few weeks later, Triangle, which was broadcasting in Wellington, went off the air in Wellington because it couldn't afford to pay the government's transmission fees. So I wrote to Jonathan Coleman saying, I can't reconcile your speech with what happened to Triangle. Why didn't you encourage diversity by finding a way of keeping Triangle on the air? It took him some months to come up with a reply, which, as you can guess, didn't deal with the issue at all. It basically said he supported diversity in television, which wasn't true, but he kept on saying it.
This is actually, I think, an underreported issue. Is we're already facing the transition to digital. It begins happening later this year. And it appears that the financial hurdles are just too big they were too big for Stratos, let alone the smaller regional broadcasters. It looks like we're going to lose them.
It all comes down apparently to digital transmission fees, and the transmission agency, I think I'm right in saying, is Cordia, and Cordia, I believe, is a government-owned entity, and Cordia seems completely unwilling, obviously doing what its government masters wanted to do, unwilling to
although it is
do any deals.
it is rumoured that Prime got a deal.
Is that right?
Yes.
If Prime got a deal, then how come Stratos couldn't get a deal?
Well, we could ask that. Rachel, you've got a mostly younger audience on Throng, and they're very enthusiastic TV watchers. Are they engaged with public broadcasting and with these issues? Are they concerned?
I think you'd find Facebook and on Throng, people are very vocal about the demise of, for example, KidZone. There was a lot of fuss about that. And I think it's very interesting that KidZone ended separately to TVNZ ending. It's almost like you're splitting up, the factions so that the protesters aren't, all combined together. So people are upset about this, and I don't see enough discussion in the media about this issue, maybe because they're in competition with public broadcasting.
That's interesting that your readers, then the reason I asked you is that the TVNZ7 audience does skew older. And it seems with these channels disappearing, it's actually an older audience that has most to lose.
Older people watch a lot of TV, and but there's also a lot of kids who, if you're wanting to have an alternative to Disney, what is there really on TV at the moment for them, apart from if you've got a Sky subscription? So
do you see that as a classic role for public service TV, to be a non-commercial space for kids viewing? Definitely, with, Te Reo and our culture, our accent on screen, and also a chance for young presenters to learn their craft in front of, a Kiwi audience. Which is the point that Michael Steadman made of Natural History New Zealand, is that a lot of people learn their craft in the public broadcasting environment. Well, we might discuss a little bit more of that after the break, but we will take a break now and be back with more on public broadcasting.